For people that have been praying for back to Jerusalem for many years, you'll know that we've been praying and working in many different communist nations. Nations like Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, China. And we have seen that there is just a way that I can't even explain it, how the nation's leaders treat their people and how the people treat each other. And I've always wondered, does this in some way connect with their belief in evolution? That's why I've asked for James to come and join us on this episode of Just Two Guys Talking, so that I can ask him questions. He is the director of this museum where we're at right now. If you don't believe in any religion, okay, cool, I get that. If you believe that it is not true, then basically it's a fairy tale.
Correct.
I don't know of anybody that I would attack for reading, Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Right.
If it is a fairy tale, where does this passion come from? A passion for killing Christians or attacking Christians.
And if a person does believe ontologically that we are made in the image of God, then I think it is a natural outcropping of that.
So what is the progression that I go from not believing that there's a God to inflicting pain on another human being for their belief that is not the same as mine?
Well, and to your point, if you obviously believe in the fall, everything, you can basically connect the dots why that would be, and it's almost like a rebellion of oneself. Now, even atheistic scholars today, let's say Alex Rosenberg, who is the head of ethics at Duke University, on camera they asked him, and he's a good guy, but they said, is there anything wrong with torturing a small child for fun? And he kind of sighed and he said, well, I don't like it any more than anyone else, but I can't say it's wrong, because without an absolute ontological right and wrong, an absolute lawgiver, whether a person is, runs someone over or helps them across the street, it's the same difference, because we're all basically from an atheistic or communistic, let's say, worldview, created by accident from the primordial soup. We've evolved by chance, blind luck, and eventually we'll die off, and that'll be it. So there's nothing that is really right or wrong in that. Now, the other point you brought up, which is interesting, is you don't see people attacking other people for their belief in Santa Claus. But with Christianity, I think where you have such really an ontology which gives not just value and meaning to life, morality, cosmology, part of the anger betrays that they actually know it's true.
For me, when I see the pain and suffering in so many different communist nations, I was just thinking about the level of misery in North Korea. This is a nation that has embraced the idea of evolution. This is a nation that has embraced the Marxist teaching. Outside of science, we have a moral issue here. And how do people that believe in evolution actually argue for a foundation of morality?
You'll sometimes hear people, to keep it simple, they might argue for theistic evolution, be that God used the mode of evolution. Some people call it evolutionary creationism, but the problem with that is true neo-Darwinism, evolution, is an unguided process purely by chance. God is a directed process, not by chance. The two go together about like a married bachelor or a square circle, so the two really cannot be reconciled. Even if I wasn't a Christian, I still wouldn't believe in evolution in the Darwinian way, just because there's really no evidence for it.
The way that I act, my moral code, I guess, is connected to my own identity. I have an idea of right and wrong that goes into my private life. A social structure can be set in place for right and wrong as well, right? And I might not do wrong, not because I believe it's wrong, but because I believe if I do that, I'll be punished by my society. So I don't do it. So that's not really the kind of morality I'm talking. My morality system comes from something that is tied to my identity, in the way that even when I'm alone, I will still maintain my morality system, because I believe I'm created for something greater.
You have a moral ontology that is grounded in God. So the fact that you're saying we're made in the image of God. Then it makes perfect sense why in our private as well as our public life, we're going to act a certain way. Now, if you take someone, let's say, I'll use an example, Michael Ruse, an agnostic, he said, I appreciate when someone says, do to your neighbor as you would yourself. He says they think they're acting above and beyond themselves, but as an evolutionist, he said it is completely illusionary. They said, what about torturing a child? He said, the person that tortures a child for fun is just as wrong as the person that says 2 + 2 = 5. And he said, some things are truly, objectively right and wrong. Be good for goodness sake. Whose goodness sake? If we are, let's just say, survival of the fittest, and you're stronger than this person, like let's say the Nazis would have done with the Jews in places like Auschwitz, how could somebody say what they did was wrong? What if the Nazis would have won and everyone in the world said what they did was right? Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, then they would have been right. But from a Christian standpoint, even if every single person alive today said what the Nazis did was right, it's still wrong because it's grounded in God's being. But the governments, especially in the 1040 window, continually try to put those scales back on. But one of the things that we're constantly fighting is that same suppression on a smaller level. If you're saying, look, a lot of your naturalistic philosophy, it doesn't hold water intellectually, instead of combating that, they will censor us. All the evidence that I'm aware of from philosophy, cosmology, biology, genetics, it's all on biblical Christianity's side. And I think that never has been a greater time for Christians to be confident in that. And to your point, and to boldly share it.
Started, because I know this is a passion, right?
I just took a chance and I just said, hey, you don't really know me from anyone, but let me lay it out on the line. I want to open up the History Museum.
Did they have a history museum?
No.
Does he know you at all?
Not really.
Have you ever worked at a history museum?
No.
Have you, you're coming out of the blue and say, I want to use your property. I want to start a Christian history museum.
He sat there and he said, well, keep going.
See, the reason I love this story, because this is back to Jerusalem. Do you know how many things we do, we get involved in, we start, that we have zero experience at all? It's not just back to Jerusalem. This is, as Christians,
yes.
We are always doing things that we are somehow not qualified to do. I mean, no offense, but you've
100%.
never worked at a history museum.
No.
When he said, let's take a chance, what does that mean?
He said, I trust you. He said, I really think that this is a God thing.
You have been living now in Arkansas for about how long?
Well, we relocated from the New York City area.
That's a huge jump. New York City, Arkansas.
Mid-90s, when I first started my undergraduate work, I worked at a microbiology lab, and I was challenged by one of the lab techs on why I was a Christian, and I actually couldn't answer any of her questions. So I really kind of did a lot of soul searching, a lot of study.
And I come across so many Christians that they feel God has called them to do something, but they're just waiting for an opportunity. They're waiting for their job to somehow, I don't know, pay them to leave. A few years later down the road, I meet with them again and find out they're still waiting to do what they believe God has called them to do.
This mountain move over here, it'll happen. Nothing's impossible. And I think that's not just metaphor. I would be like, wow, this is a real dagger that was around 1200 BC. Wow, that would have been about the same time as ending period of the Judges, Saul. You know what? Yeah, I'll take that. What are you going to do with it? My wife would ask. I don't know. And then lo and behold, some of these artifacts, and then all of a sudden, well, now they're here.
I would love to see the museum.
Floors were torn up, kind of. The electricity wasn't quite working. Spiders and, the whole 9 yards. Oh, boy, this is going to be some work.
And you still keep your full-time job?
Correct.
So your job allows you to do this ministry?
Yes, that does get kind of exhausting sometimes, but at the same time, God does work in mysterious ways. That's why I always encourage people, if I can do this, anyone can.
Oftentimes, I think in the West, we think that, well, if you are involved in business and ministry at the same time, it's because you suck at ministry.
Right.
If you were better at ministry, you wouldn't need a job, because your job would be ministry and you'd be getting enough donations to be able to pay for your income, but you don't, because you're not very good, so you have to keep your daytime job to support your ministry hobby. But that's not the way that we see it inside of China because of the persecution. The business allows the Chinese to have access to a lot of unbelievers on a regular basis. It allows their family financially to be taken care of, and it allows them to move in ministry without exhausting resources from the people that are being ministered to. And one of the things that I love about working together with the Chinese is their passion for doing ministry at any cost. And they will do any business in order to do what they believe that God has called them to do. And so that's why I love what you're doing. What are we looking at?
When we first walk in, we have kind of an introduction to cosmology, why there is a beginning, how that ties into in the beginning God. Once we make it to this section, we're really just looking at mostly the Old Testament, the Lachish ostraca,
Which is what?
pottery shards that a lot of times stories were written on.
Okay.
So what you're seeing is basically almost an eyewitness, someone who was there, who was writing, oh, the city's falling, here's what's happening. Well, then, centuries later, we find it, we read it, and we go, this matches the biblical narrative precisely. So it's that kind of extra biblical precision that we can test and look at archaeologically to see that the Old Testament is corroborated by a lot of external evidence.
One of the things that fascinates me, I noticed it right away when I kind of came up, this is basically kind of the first human rights charter.
The Cyrus cylinder?
Yes. It's sitting kind of at the foundation of the United Nations.
This is basically a cylinder. You would have it almost kind of where it was rolled and then sent out. Of course, the replica, there's missing pieces.
Would you roll it on
It'd be like a parchment.
a parchment?
It's possible they could have used vellum. Even early cuneiform, a lot of times it was used as an impression. You're basically seeing an edict. If you're looking through the Old Testament, you see 586, the Jews were led off into captivity. And then they were freed, according to the Bible, by Cyrus. But this is an edict to all the nations where Cyrus is proclaiming them free to go back to their lands. Now, even though it doesn't specifically mention the Jews, it completely matches with what we're seeing in the biblical narrative.
For me, this is a big story because when we look at Iran today, it looks nothing like the land that was ruled over by King Cyrus. Because King Cyrus, who basically came up with this order that was to be sent out to all the countries to set their slaves free, his main focus turned towards freeing the Jews, blessing them in their temple, sending them back with the riches of their captors. So he's blessing the temple or the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. And I think that it's a remarkable reminder. Those that follow God, it's almost like something comes out of them that empathizes for others, that begins to love other people. And as a result, human rights. I'm reminded of Brother Yun was coming out of a meeting, and a reporter comes up and asks, how do you feel about animal rights in China? At that time, animal rights was on the forefront of everybody's mind, especially as it related to China. And Brother Yun said simply, China needs Jesus. If we can get Jesus into China, human rights will be better. Animal rights will be better. And all of these things will fall into place if we can bring Christ into China. If we can bring God into Iran. We can see what Iran used to be, which was pro-Israel, pro-Jew, pro-human life.
Right.
This is basically Iran's Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation Proclamation. And this amazing empire, the Persian Empire, one of the strongest empires of the world, was not built on the backs of slaves.
Correct.
Did not need slaves because of this little reminder.
No, it's a great point. And like we were talking earlier, Rodney Stark, and even as an agnostic, he's traced back the path where everywhere Christianity goes, the history of science, the history of history, shows that when nations are open, when you have the light of the gospel, you will see the nation as a whole blessed and opened up.